In my latest short stop motion film, Rat Race, which is currently on the channel, I'll put a link if you want to see it, I set myself a challenge. Could I make a whole short film in just 4 days? Quite an ambitious task, and then I had an idea which was also quite ambitious. It was the Lunar New Year coming up, the year of the rat, and I wanted to do a film called Rat Race with little rats running around my house, stuck in this rat race, playing on the idea of what a rat race means, an endless, self-defeating or pointless pursuit. So the idea was that these rats just keep running, chasing, looking for success or whatever it is that they want, but they're never finding it because they're just stuck in this loop of running and trying to get what they want, rather than just being patient, taking their own path and not getting caught up in this whole race of life that doesn't really exist. So in order to complete this film in just 4 days, I had to work smart and I had to be creative and really think, how on earth am I going to achieve this in just 4 days? I wanted it to be done in stop motion, I wanted it to look real, and I really had my heart set on sculpting the rats out of clay. So I came up with this idea after studying some rat movement and finding out how rats run, of making a rat run cycle which just used 4 different rat positions and sculpting those positions and animating the run, which I could then composite with backgrounds, duplicate, and essentially make a lot of rats through only having to sculpt 12. Now, I did spend over 2 whole days just sculpting the rats, but that was the longest part of the process. I mean, the post-production and compositing was quite long as well. This was one of the brown rats, and I probably took about 40 minutes to sculpt this one. It was the first one I sculpted. It was quite straightforward from that point on. Just a lot of observation and care to make sure that the proportions were correct and that within a cycle of rats, the rat looked like the same rat essentially. After sculpting the first set, I obviously had to make sure that this actually was going to work, so I had to do an animation test. So I took the rats into my studio, photographed them, I held them up with a spool of wire. I did this so that I didn't deform the feet and I could make a fake floor in Dragon Frame by just putting a guide line across. And as long as I was lining up the feet on that line, it should, in theory, work. So the idea was that I would do one complete run cycle and see how that worked. So I put my first rat there in its position, lined it up with my fake floor, put some markers there so I could see where the feet were and the nose, so that I could get the next rat in the correct position as if it was running forwards. And I kept doing this with all my different rat poses until I had got a finished run cycle. And then it was the moment of truth. Was this technique actually going to work? Now, if you've already seen the film, you know that it does. I was quite impressed with how well this technique actually did work. So after my successful animation test, I then had to make some more rats. I didn't want just brown rats, I wanted a variety of rats, and I thought I could try changing the hue in Photoshop, but it didn't really look that great. So the only way to get around this was to sculpt some more rats. Hence why I spent over 2 days sculpting rats for this film. So I went back to the beginning and I started making a set of 4 white rats. To do this, I just got the same amount of clay for each one, so that I knew that my rats would be roughly the same size, and then I just incrementally started sculpting them. So I started with the bodies, then I added heads, and then I just worked in the details into each rat as I went. And 3 or 4 hours later, I had my second set of rats. And then after the white rats, I also sculpted a set of grey rats. And then when I had my 3 complete sets of rats, I had to do the actual real run cycle sequences that you see in the film. So I used exactly the same process as I did in my test, except for I switched out my lens and I went for a 50mm lens because you could get more depth of field, so you've got that nice blurred background. And I decided to use the 50mm lens for the whole film. So I got some nice soft backgrounds and the rats were a bit sharper in the foreground. So after photographing all of my little rats, the next part of the process was to remove the backgrounds in Photoshop. I just did this with the eraser tool. It's probably not the best method, but it works for me and I quite enjoy doing it that way. And then I removed the background out completely, saved them as PNGs, and then I could drop them into my After Effects timeline where I was going to composite everything together. But before I could do that, I had to do some more animation. Now I had to go around the house animating backgrounds, because I wanted my environments to interact with my rats. So one of the examples of this that you will have seen in the film is the bath mat. So what I did was I put this little roll of washi tape into the scene to signify where my rats would be, to make sure that I got my focus correct. And then I was animating the bath mat moving so that when the rats run across it, it kind of looks as if they're creating movement in the mat. That was the idea anyway. So I just went in with my hand and I incrementally, about an inch at a time, moved the texture of the mat so that when the rats run across, you get a little bit of movement happening. You can see this in the finished film. I think it was quite effective. I composited this first, decided I quite liked how it looked, and then I used the same technique up in the bedroom with the bed sheets. So most of the editing and compositing for this project was done in After Effects. So here on this blue layer, we have got the brown rat. You can see I can make that appear and disappear. And then if we double click on that composition, you'll see that this brown rat is made up of a lot of layers. So we've got all the different layers for the run. I used a rainbow to highlight this. So it goes red, orange, yellow, green, blue for a run cycle, and then it repeats. So this is the rat just running on its own. So basically each different coloured rat had a different sequence. Then I duplicated the sequence and adjusted the scale. Now the toilet roll composition was slightly more complicated. I had my rats, I had my background, and then I had to duplicate the front of the toilet roll and overlay that on top, so that the rats were hidden underneath. If we take away these top toilet rolls, you'll see that the rats are just running in front of the tube. And to make them disappear and look as if they're going through the tube, I just made new fronts of the toilet roll tube. So now the rats can disappear and go through the tube. Another little trick I did for the rat that comes back in at the end and goes the other way because he's choosing his own path and he's not following the race, he's not getting involved in the competition of life, and he's just doing things on his own timeline. This little bit of movement for the rat here. So opened up here, you can see that I animated this little rat with the puppet pin tool. So if we select all of these layers, you can see all the little pins that I put in my rat, and then I animated these to give my rat a bit of movement whilst it's static before it continues running. The final part of the process, the other stuff that I needed to grab, were sound effects. All of the sounds that you hear I created myself in this film. A lot of the rat noises were made with my own mouth. Yep, squeaking and snorty grunting noises. I sat there and made a load of noises, and that's what you've got in the film. And for all of the rat movements, I literally went to every single environment that I had filmed and I tapped my fingers on the surfaces to create the little feet rat taps, and then those were the sound effects that I used. I just layered them up in each scene. If you like my videos and the things that I make on this channel and find them helpful, please do try and support me in whatever way you can. Even if it's just by sharing a video so that it reaches a few more people. I really appreciate every single one of you that is able to help. I want to keep making more useful, helpful, ambitious, pushing the boundary type stuff, and growth of the channel and support on Patreon and Skillshare and other places where you might be able to help me out are going to make that more achievable. And yeah, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tap the bell icon to be notified of future videos from me. I have got loads of ideas for this year, so yeah, stay tuned.